There's a phrase in one of the songs that talked about our living hope, and that comes from one of the scriptures that I'm going to refer to this morning in 1 Peter chapter 1. Jesus Christ, our living hope, is what the song says, and we'll get to that after a bit. Hope is such a fundamental part of our lives, of humans being well and humans being in a place where we can move forward, where we can flourish. Hope, it's part of our emotional health, it's part of our well-being, it's part of our recovery, it's part of our healing, it's part of our future. It is so broad and so important. Hope comes from some understanding or some promise of reality, of a possibility. And hope comes from a possibility that's beyond where we currently are. Hope is something that helps us look past what we see right now. Hope is something that helps us imagine things that are different now. And the reality for us is that sometimes we feel like hope is lost, or we feel like hope is not really describable. There's no, it feels sometimes like I can't really describe what hope should look like for me right now. And there are times when we feel like we're drowning in whatever the circumstance is, and it's very hard to see hope. It reminds me, when I say that, I just picture again that 2 or 3 feet of water. I can see it in my mind just as plain as day. When I gave up hope one time, I was 16 years old, and I gave up hope because I couldn't swim anymore, and I gave up. And I can still see the greenish color of that 2 feet of water or so that I was drowning in, literally. And as you can see, that didn't happen. Someone saw it happening from shore and all of a sudden grabbed me from behind and took me to shore. And there was a hope there that I didn't even know about. There was hope for me that I had I never knew. I thought there wasn't any hope. And in reality, there was. But as we talk about it, as we sing about it, and as we read things in the Bible about hope, we sometimes have smaller or larger ideas of that hope. And so much of the time, our hope seems to be like peeking through a keyhole or peeking through a small peephole and seeing a little bit of something that looks like hope. Maybe a lot of you don't know what a keyhole is anymore, but there was a day when doors had keyholes that went the whole way through them, and you could look through them. And maybe if you've been in an old house, you might have seen some of that, even though you're too young to have used that kind of keys. This morning, we want to talk about the scope of our hope, because though we look through a glass darkly, like the scripture says, and though we look through a keyhole sometimes and feel like we just see a little bit of it, there are ways that we can keep expanding the scope of our hope. And it's such a different thing to step around the door to the other side and actually see what's in the room. It's such a different thing to not just look through a little peephole between the blind and the window frame, but to actually step outside the door and see the outside, to see the outdoors, and to walk in it. And so I'm not going to be able to do that perfectly for you this morning, but I hope to help us imagine and think about a bigger hope than we sometimes sing about, a bigger hope than we sometimes read when we read about hope in the scriptures, and because I think it's more in line with God's idea of hope. It's sad when we're still our coffee in a thimble when we could have a big mug. It's sad when we just taste a crumb of what is reality when we could have the whole cake and eat it too. That it's almost possible that the hope that we have, and I'd like to talk about that. But first, just a way that we think about our hope, because our hope is. Oh, let me back up. I wanted to say one more thing about this. The second thing, as we look at the hope, what I'm going to do this morning is review the 3 R's. That's another old people thing. I don't think schools talk much about the 3 R's anymore. What were they back in the day? 3 R's. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. No, not spelling. We needed no S's for spelling, that's for sure. But what I really want you to go home with this morning is the 3 R's of hope. And that's not a limitation, because you could add other things, but we're going to go to the 3 R's of hope. But I want to think about the border crossings between the Central America and U.S. this morning, and so that just seems such a helpful illustration with what I'm talking about this morning. Hope for these people has many, many layers and many, many ways of describing it. And some of these people have a thimble-sized idea or a peephole-sized idea of what it means to come to the United States or Canada. Most of them have a very small container for their hope, a very small peephole that they're looking through. I would imagine. I haven't talked to them, and I don't, but I think it's obvious that would be true. Because thousands of people try to cross the border every day, or most days, and they hope for a good life. But they have really no understanding of a larger purpose. They have no concept of what it means to be an American. And they have no allegiance to the future of the United States of America at that point. What are they focused on? What is their hope focused on? It is focused on crossing the border. That's the peephole that they are, and I'm assuming a lot of things because I'm not there walking with them. I'm not listening to them talk. So I'm sharing my imagination of what it's like. And I just make sure you cross the border, they're saying to each other, and they're thinking. Just make sure that we reach our destination, they're thinking. And maybe they're singing one of our songs. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop. Maybe they're singing, maybe their thimbleful is that I'll someday benefit from this place I'm going to. And some of them are saying to each other, just don't stay in Venezuela. Just don't be where you are. Cross the border. And this is true. And this holds water. It holds something for these migrants. It holds a bit of hope that is not wrong in itself. But it's a scope of hope that is really, really limited and cannot remain if they are to thrive as citizens or even as illegal aliens in another country. No one will thrive with just arriving. No one will thrive with just making it. No one will thrive with just crossing the border or not being where we are. I know the first part, I just want to set us up a little bit for a different way of thinking. And part of that, part of the peephole kind of hope that I want to help you rethink or encourage you to rethink, comes from so many of the songs we sing or the way we tell the story about what it means to cross the border, what it means to leave Venezuela and end up in the United States. I feel like in North America especially, we have shortened the gospel, we have shortened the message until it fits into a thimble. And we've done it for so long that we believe that that is the gospel. We have looked through a peephole for so long that we believe that that's the vision. We believe that that's the room. That's the way it is. And I think as we look at the 3 R's of God's purposes, you will see that his purpose is very different than the way we tell the story. If you're interested, please don't get your phone out and do it right now. But if you're interested, you can see what I'm talking about on a current website that's called heavenornot.net. And this is a crossing the border kind of gospel. This is a just don't be in Venezuela kind of message. And this is a hope that is all true, but is a thimble. There's nothing false about it, except that it doesn't let us see more of God's purposes and plan. So it's not about, my point this morning is not just what is wrong, but it is to help us, open our eyes and our ears and our hearts to a different scope of hope. I'm suggesting this morning that's an example of what is not actually the biblical story and what Scripture describes as our ultimate hope. The Bible describes a universe-sized hope, not a thimbleful, an actual universe size, and I'll show you what I mean by that. By the way, I hope to just go pretty fast And without making our service go long, I'm going to let you ask questions or respond or argue or not argue. We're not going to argue, but you can push back or say whatever you want. I'm going to really plan to leave time for that. So before I begin the 3 R's, one little thing. There are 2 common limitations to the scope of our hope. And I'm talking about R as in the North American version of hope, of the message of hope. The first one is, we've learned to use language and story to describe salvation as to be among those who are snatched off this cursed earth and rescued from our cursed bodies and taken to a safe location is destroyed. That version of hope has become literally a multi-million-dollar industry. People make massive amounts of money with movies and books on that version of our hope. The second limitation to our scope of hope is that we spend so much effort trying to decode the language, the specifics and details of how things will play out. Especially from the books of Daniel and the books of prophecy and the Revelation, we spend so much time trying to decode the symbolic or literal or what language we spend so much time decoding it that we lose sight of the larger story. We lose sight of the hope, the purposes of God, especially in all of it. And I feel like that kind of a hobby diverts us, or easily can divert us from the greater hope. So let's look at some passages to try to get a better understanding about hope as God describes it, as the story of the Bible describes it from beginning to end. And I mean literally from beginning to end. Because the first 2 chapters of the Bible and the last 2 chapters, or the first 3 chapters of the Bible and the last 3 chapters of the Bible, are parallel stories. They are parallel. And they are bookends to this entire story of hope. Now, I don't have time this morning to explain all that I mean by that, and I can tell you that it's on my mind to have a winter class this winter on Sunday evening like I've done other years, and we'll talk more about some of these things if you're interested. But let's talk about the 3 R's that I believe really can help us to have a scope of hope that is more in line with God's purposes. They are redemption, reconciliation, and resurrection. So let's take them one by one quickly, and we'll summarize right after that. Redemption. Hope is redemption in God's purposes. Redemption refers to something that once was. It connects. Redemption is necessary or possible because of something that once was. And it promises in God's economy that what is wrong will be made right. Redemption, just getting from Venezuela to United States. Redemption is making Venezuela an entirely different place. That's God's idea of redemption, is that Venezuela becomes a different place. His hope is not to escape. His hope is to redeem. God's hope is a message of redemption. Let me show you. Now, these could be seen as isolated scriptures, but they add up to something that really is a theme. Romans 8, and I know that's small, but it's there if you can see it or if you brought your binoculars. I'm going to read it for you. For I consider, Paul is talking here, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. The word soul is not included here. And isn't it interesting that Paul starts with the creation's redemption rather than with the human's redemption, and then sort of tack on the idea that creation will be redeemed? No, the whole theme is that creation is redeemed, and it includes humans. That's how he comes at it here. That doesn't mean that's all there is to it. I'm not saying that. I'm telling you that some of the recent as in especially the last 150 years and especially the last 50 to 75 years, some of the recent books and teachings and songs and movies do not even take this passage into consideration. And what it's telling us, which is confirmed in Revelation, the last few chapters, is that this earth is not the place we're escaping from. It's where we're going to end up. This is going to be redeemed. Venezuela is going to be redeemed in the redemption plan of God. And people won't need to escape it because it's going to be set right. That's what Paul is predicting here. That's what he's describing. The whole creation, the whole cosmos is to be revealed, is to listen to this again. Verse 21, that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. The creation will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. The same glory that we're looking forward to, the same glory that we look forward to, creation will be set free and become that. So we'll keep going here. I want to leave time. Hope is also reconciliation. Reconciliation is putting back together what has been estranged, what has been broken, what has been alienated. Now, some of this overlaps with what we just said. Went to the wrong. Some of Colossians, Paul again, writes about who this amazing Jesus the Christ is. Paul is writing in Colossians one of the most eloquent and one of the most beautiful descriptions of who the Christ is and what his nature and purpose is. And I want to read some of these verses, because this is the hope. This is one of the places where we read about the hope of reconciliation. Speaking of Christ, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. There we are again, connecting Christ as the firstborn of creation. Doesn't make him a creature, doesn't make him created, but he is the firstborn of the reconciled, the redeemed, the resurrected of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him, pay special attention to the next two verses. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. If these were isolated scriptures, if they weren't confirmed by other texts, we would say, well, that's spiritual. That's he's reconciling the people of the world to himself. But he keeps coming back to the idea that he's even reconciling creation to himself. The peephole is much bigger than looking out and seeing a few cars that are going to be fixed someday. It's like stepping out the door and seeing at least as much as we can about the entire scope of what is there is to be redeemed and reconciled. That's his purpose. That's his plan. And then the third R, hope is resurrection. Resurrection we could describe in many ways, but one of them is that resurrection is infusing life into what is dead or destroyed. And God is a God of resurrection. He's a God of redemption. He's a God of reconciliation. And he's a God of resurrection. Because not Adam and Eve's sinful action or eating the fruit that caused the problem. It caused the problem. But their sins are not the eternal issue or the ongoing issue that requires redemption and reconciliation and resurrection. What happened is that they opened the door. They rejected the reign of God. They rejected the oneness they had, the fellowship in the garden, which is a type of temple, not a productive garden. It's a temple picture. And they were together in oneness with God, and they rejected it. And they allowed the rule of death, of sin, and of demons to make a massive difference in the world until the coming and the cross of Christ. And you might think that there still is nothing really changed, but everything has changed since the resurrection of Christ. Everything is different. The scriptures tell us that he is seated at the right hand of the Father, seated being a message that says he is reigning, that he is in control, that he not making all things happen the way you want them to, but he reigns already. We sing about that sometimes, and it's true. He already reigns, and his resurrection was not just a spiritual resurrection. As we sang this morning, a beautiful phrase in that one song, his buried body began to breathe. And he is the firstborn in the resurrection. He is the first. Other people had come to life, but he is the firstborn. He is the first in the resurrection. And the resurrection of bodies is part of this large hope. We are not saved, quote unquote, in order that our souls go to a place that has no material substance. That's temporary. What is described here with Paul is that redemption and reconciliation and resurrection puts everything right. It takes more faith to believe all that than it does even that I have a good place to go after I die. That takes a lot of faith, but it takes even a greater scope of faith, a greater scope of vision to believe that God is going to redeem and reconcile and resurrect everything, and that the earth he created, the creation that he called good in every way, he called it good in every way. He's not finished with it. He's not finished with this creation, and he's not finished with your body. Don't hate your body and don't hate creation. They're not your enemies. They're part of a temporary problem. They're part of our temporary transitions. Leaves fall off of trees. Flowers shrivel up and die. But that's not the story. Our hope is that redemption and reconciliation and resurrection are completed ideas, powerful realities that Jesus Christ finished for us and that we will see played out until we enjoy all of that. I encourage you to reread the scriptures about our hope. If making it across the border is what you already are looking for, you will find it. If decoding all the metaphors and symbolic language is your hobby, you can spend lots of time doing that. If looking for the themes of God's ultimate purposes is your orientation, you will begin to see that in a new way. If you're eager to tell God's story instead of telling a story that meets your needs and desires, you'll have a new grasp of the gospel. I'm pretty sure that, for me included, the size and scope of our hope in Christ can be revolutionized. It can be redeemed. It can be reconciled. And it can be infused with life. I'm done. If you have something to ask or say in the next few minutes, I want to leave. I don't want to make us go late here, but if you have something you'd like to ask or say, I'm willing to take time for that. I'm not sure who's on for Keith. Nomar is. I thought it said Keith, but he's not here. So I'll take questions or comments quickly, and then Lamar will come. If you don't have any, that's just fine. Arthur.
What you were saying about people getting so wrapped up in exactly how everything's going to be, basically, You didn't say it that way. I'm rephrasing it my way. But it feels like a lot of people get so wrapped up in exactly, they have to figure out how it's all going to pan out and exactly what it's going to be like. And the Bible does not give us every single little detail, exactly whatever. We don't know. You know? We know some very basic stuff. And so I think it's a really good reminder for us to focus on who God is, not on all the little details. We just don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly. I mean, I've been thinking lots about it because of Iris. So, but then I just keep reminding myself, I don't know what it's going to be like exactly. I don't know what the new earth or the heaven's going to be like, or the new Jerusalem. I just don't know exactly.
Right.
I only know a few basic things.
I agree with that 100%. We find it interesting to speculate and try to think what this means and whether Israel is about to sacrifice the red heifer or whether Israel is going to be a nation or all those things. Those are interesting things, but they don't help us grasp a larger scope of purposes of God as I see it, and so I think that those can be interesting hobbies, but they haven't helped people really grasp and own a hope that is about redemption and reconciliation and resurrection. Someone else? Paul?
It's very good that you alluded to, I guess, some of the distractions that we see, i.e. I'll call it the doctrine of LaHaye and Jenkins, because that's more or less what the angle you took with that. And I think that really it is this distraction from what's reality, because Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. We're not to shy away from it. We're not to say there's not going to be any pain and we're going to be taken away from it. We're going to be left in it. But he says, take courage because I am with you. And I think that there's a great amount of hope that we can take from that. That, he says, I will never leave you nor forsake you.
Thank you. I'm not going to try to, for those listening, I'm not going to, Paul just talked about the hope being that God will take us through, not spare us from everything. Anyone else? Jenny?
You said that you referenced Jesus being the first fruits of the resurrection.
Yes.
So what's the difference between that and, like, he did raise some people from the dead before, during his ministry?
Yeah. Jenny's asking what's the difference between the people that Jesus raised from the dead, or even that Old Testament prophets raised from the dead, and she didn't say that, and the resurrection. And once again, like Arthur said, we don't know a lot. There's a lot of things we don't know. But one thing that is different, this is where I encourage you to read 1 Corinthians 15, which I didn't take time to read this morning. But in 1 Corinthians 15, he talks about the essence of resurrection as being, we plant one kind of body. He calls it a seed, but what he's saying is, we actually plant a body. We plant a seed when we plant a body. And what grows out of it is not the same type of body. What was planted was temporary and mortal. What comes out, what grows out of it in the resurrection is immortal. And when the resurrection happens, then bodies that were planted in one way or another will be raised in a different existence, which I can't describe, but we have clues about it because of how Jesus acted and lived and what he did after his resurrection. He acted entirely different than Lazarus did. after Lazarus came back to life. Lazarus didn't go from here to there or just appear out of sort of thin air. Jesus could both be in this realm and in that realm in very close space, which tells me that that realm is not way off somewhere. That realm is right here, and Jesus moved back and forth between the two realms at will. And maybe that's some indication of some of the differences between the resurrected person and the one that simply was resuscitated.
Another big difference is Lazarus died again.
Yes, that is the essence of resurrection, is that there's no more death. And someone back here had a hand, or was it just Lamar telling me my time's up? No, I'm kidding. I know you weren't. Did someone have a hand here? Same thing. Thank you. All right. Thanks. God bless.